Hello, 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 and welcome back to another episode of The Unlearning Alchemist. I want to thank you all for being here today. And if you are new here, let me explain what it is we do. This is where we break down those generational curses, go through those barriers that have been holding us back, and unlearn all those unhealthy ways that we have learned to survive through life. Because we are not surviving anymore, we are thriving. And on today's episode, I went with a walk with my daughter. And upon recording this, it was a pretty stressful week. As I said, I had just lost my job and things had been rough. But as I went out in nature with her, things started clicking for me. Have you ever went out in nature and it just feels like the trees are holding a mirror up to you? Like your own kid is holding a mirror up to you. Like you thought you were just going on a hike, but you really walked straight into a therapy session with the earth. And that was me that weekend. I was on the trail with my daughter and she was running ahead, laughing at every stick and bug, like it's the most important thing in the world to her. And I realized childhood is supposed to look exactly like that. Wonder, joy, innocence, vulnerability. But for so many of us, it wasn't, it isn't, it didn't. Growing up isn't realizing how many adults around you weren't gentle, weren't safe, or weren't even trying to be. And now as the new generation of parents and adults, it's on us to make sure kids aren't left carrying the weight we did. So, here's the hard truth. A lot of us, what we grew up calling normal parenting was actually harmed dressed as discipline. Yelling wasn't teaching you respect. It was teaching you fear. Ignoring your emotions wasn't making you tough. It was teaching you to silence yourself. And beatings weren't love. They were trauma handed down like a family heirloom. So let me ask you this. How many times as a kid were you actually taught something versus just controlled? Because control and teaching are not the same. Teaching builds skills. Control builds compliance. And compliance without understanding, that's just survival. And they dressed it up by calling it disrespect every time we decided to voice ourselves, to show emotions, to have opinions. And that's not what parenting is. So let's get real nerdy for a second. Childhood experiences literally shape the brain. Ever heard of the ACEs study, the adverse childhood experiences? It showed that kids who go through consistent trauma, neglect, abuse, and instability are at way higher risk for depression, anxiety, addiction, and even physical illnesses later in life. Why? Because trauma wires your brain for survival instead of building neural pathways for curiosity and play. Your brain builds pathways for hypervigilance, scanning for danger, reading people's moods, predicting harm before it comes. That's why so many of us grew up feeling like we couldn't relax. That's why you struggle to trust kindness. That's why peace feels so suspicious. Your brain never got the chance to practice safety, so safety feels foreign. And no, kids don't just forget. Even if you don't remember every detail, your body does. Trauma gets stored in the nervous system. It shows up in your triggers, your relationships, the way you parent, the way you move through the world in general. And unless we face it head on, we pass it down. That's called intergenerational trauma. Harm repeating itself through families because nobody stopped to say this ends here. Now, I'm sure you're wondering how I ended up here, but this is what nature gave me on that trail. A reminder that silence is not neutral. Too many adults hide behind, it's not my business, but if you see a child being mistreated and you say nothing, you've chosen a side. And it's not the child's. Kids remember who hurt them, but they also remember who watched and did nothing. And I know this personally. There were adults who saw me struggling, who knew something wasn't right, and they stayed silent. Did you know how heavy that silence feels to kids? It feels like abandonment, like the world agreed you weren't worth protecting. So when people ask me why I speak up now, why I don't just mind my business, it's because kids are my business. All kids. Because too many of us were the child nobody fought for, and I refuse to repeat that cycle. That's why I create what I create. That's why Amara's Amazing Adventures, Amara's Smart Clicks is dropping soon to teach kids safety in a world that's not always safe. Because protection doesn't stop at home anymore. It's in group chats, the DMs, the online games. And that's also why I've decided to bring into what happens in this house, which is coming soon. Because breaking cycles starts with telling the truth. If you can't name the harm, you can't heal it. But I don't want this to just be my reflection. I want it to be yours too. So let me ask you, when you think about your childhood, which adults made you feel safe? Which ones made you shrink? And even ask yourself, what cycles are you actively breaking? And what cycles are you still excusing because that's just how family is? Because be honest with yourself. Honesty is where the healing starts. Walking that trail reminded me, trees don't grow crooked on their own. Something bent them. And kids don't grow broken by accident. Something or someone bent them too. But here's the hope. Just like the trees with time, support, and safety, kids can grow strong again. Healing is possible. Cycles can be broken, but only if we stop pretending harm is tradition. So here's where I land. Too much love has never broken a child. Too little has ruined plenty, though. And if that makes me unpopular with adults who want to defend their harmful parenting, fine. I didn't come here for them. I come here for every child, every kid, and even for my own daughter, because I'm still waiting for an adult to step up for me. And maybe that adult is you. Because there are times where we genuinely have to ask ourselves, are we really thriving or genuinely just surviving? And our kids are taking the butt in, getting the raw end of the deal. We have to remember that every unhealed trauma we have, every time we decide that our trauma is not worth healing, that we are not worth healing, we are deciding that our kids will take on that emotional death. And that load, it's a really heavy load to be the parent that has to break these generational curses. I know it's hard. It's even harder when you feel as though you have no one in your corner that genuinely and actively supports this as well within your family. As someone who has to cut off their whole family due to them all being toxic and deciding that healing wasn't worth my daughter's mental health and well-being and livelihood and a genuine childhood, I understand your pain. I understand where you're coming from and where you're trying to go. And that's why I'm here to tell you that no, it is not easy, but it is so worth it. Because watching my daughter live this childish life that I wish I could have at her age is more than I could have ever dreamed to see growing up. Although we decide sometimes that we might not be doing our best, we do have to look inside and ask ourselves, what are we truly doing in order to break these curses? How are we actively going about breaking generational curses? And there's little things you can start with, like genuinely helping your kid process emotions and honestly learning to process your own first. Because a child who doesn't understand their emotions grows up to be an unregulated adult who has temper tantrums. And let's be real, we have enough of those in the world already. I want to thank you for being here, because being here means that you know that it is time to stop the bullshit, to become something so much more than what the generations before you were, to be something so much more for your family and your loved ones and your children. And that in itself is such a big step. Acknowledgement is the first key. Self-awareness is a big key. And to be able to understand that that is where you stand in your journey is an amazing experience. And I am so proud of you for being here. But let's not stop at acknowledgement, because acknowledgement without change is just manipulation and honestly generational curse after generational curse. Let's not repeat the cycles, and let's become the parents, the generation of parents who decided that it was time to be different, time to be something better. Because at the end of the day, we are all just big kids learning life as well. And just like our kids, they are nothing but little forms, little humans learning to understand life and navigate it as well. And it is up to us as the parents, the guardians, the caretakers of these children to show them a better way, to be better than our parents were for us. Being better than your parents is the bare minimum. Let's break the cycles. Let's be more than better. Let's be the parents that raised the generation of kids who could self-regulate, who could understand emotions, who can process and grow up in healthy households. Again, I want to thank you for being here, and I'm going to leave you all with a couple of journal prompts. Who was the first adult that made you feel truly safe, and what did they do differently than other adults? What patterns from your childhood are you committed to not passing down? Where in your life are you still minding your business when kids are being harmed? And how can you show up this week as a safe adult for any child, even in small ways? Give yourself grace as you answer these questions, but please understand that these are important questions that need answers, because healing can only be done when you decide to take acknowledgement and put in action. Acknowledgement without action is nothing. Again, thank you for being here today. And although we talk about serious topics in a not so serious way, please understand that your mental health is something very serious. And if you are someone you love or know is battling a mental health crisis, please feel free to reach out to some of the free resources that I have provided at the end of this video. I want to thank you for waking up again today and deciding to strive for excellence, whether it was just getting out of the bed and taking a shower or getting up and deciding to launch a new business. Whatever the feat was, I am so proud of you. Again, thank you for joining me, and see you next time.